The classroom was still, except for the faint squeak of chairs and the scratching of pencils. At the front, the teacher held a small paperback closer to her chest, her patient smile steady as she called the next name. All around, children shifted in their seats, some whispering, some staring at the floor. The 8-year-old girl in the second row kept her gaze fixed on the pattern of green squares in the carpet. Her fists were pressed tight against her thighs under the desk. The teacher's voice carried warmth, but there was an edge beneath it. She had asked many times before, "Sweetheart, would you like to read just one line for us?" The book stayed open in her hand, waiting. No answer came. The girl's lips parted slightly, but not a sound emerged. Her classmates sighed quietly, the impatience of 8-year-olds spilling out in small huffs and whispers. Someone tapped a pencil against the desk. Someone else giggled. The longer the silence stretched, the heavier it grew. She shrank lower. The paper in front of her felt like a sheet of thorns, jagged words scrawled across it. This was not the first refusal. Week after week, her teacher had ended up moving on, filling the space with another child's eager voice. But the concern was growing too sharp to ignore. A string of failing grades had begun piling up in her folder. Teachers whispered together in the staff lounge. Some wondered aloud if she would be held back. At the small table inside the principal's office, a red folder landed with a soft thump. Inside, her test papers, each page marked with an X. The principal rubbed his chin slowly. He had seen children struggle before, but this was something heavier. Something unspoken filled the air. A question that seemed to press from every corner. Why? Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this one remind us we're not alone, and hearing from you helps others feel seen. In the hallway outside the classroom, the quiet truth of her struggles was about to reach the principal's ears. A mixture of compassion and urgency set the stage for what would come next. And yet, in that silent moment inside the classroom, all anyone could notice was a small girl staring hard at the floor, desperate for the words on the page to disappear. Every morning, the bell rang sharply, and the desks filled with restless children. On the whiteboard, new spelling words appeared each week in neat columns, ordinary to some, but to her, it might as well have been a sea of twisting shapes. During reading circle, the teacher passed a book around. Each child read a few sentences, their voices sometimes halting, but always audible. When the book reached her hands, tiny fingerprints smudged on the cover, she clamped it shut and kept her head down. Children around her fidgeted, whispering impatiently, but the teacher always softened her tone. "That's fine, dear." When you're ready, the class would move on, though the looks exchanged between kids lingered like needles. At her desk, worksheets were often left half blank. Wrong answers sprawled across multiplication problems. Sentences stopped halfway through. During one spelling test, she wrote down only 3 words before sliding the paper under her arm, hiding it as if it might vanish if nobody looked. Her teacher noticed these little gestures and tried small ways of encouragement, laying a sticker on her page, praising the neatness of her handwriting. But the ache in the teacher's eyes never faded. At home, the struggle continued. The kitchen table was their battlefield each night. Pencil shavings scattered, erasers rubbed flat. Her mother sighed softly while turning each crumpled paper over. Sometimes the girl stuffed entire worksheets deep into her backpack before retreating to her bedroom. In the quiet, she curled on her bed, pulling the blanket high, hoping no one would ask again. Her mother tried gentle tones. "Let's do just 3 problems together." At other times, she slipped into weary frustration. "Why won't you even try?" The mixing of worry and blame weighed heavily in the air. Small signs of concern slipped into her mother's daily routine. She checked the backpack when her daughter was asleep, smoothing out the wrinkled papers. She phoned the teacher after dinner, asking if the classroom troubles matched what she was seeing at home. They did. Meanwhile, the girl stayed quiet about the growing torment at school. Children noticed her silence and began to whisper, "She never reads. She's dumb." The words weren't shouted, but they carried across the playground, biting sharper than any raised voice could. One rainy Tuesday, the teacher prepared another progress report. It showed a string of failures across nearly every subject. She hesitated before sliding it into the envelope, knowing where it would end up next. By Friday afternoon, the packet landed on the principal's desk. He studied the pages carefully. The low scores, the unchecked assignments, the notes describing her refusals in class. His brow furrowed. He tapped the side of the folder, the weight of a decision slowly settling on his shoulders. He had to understand what was happening. This wasn't ordinary struggling. Something deeper lived inside those blank answers and silent refusals. The principal leaned back in his chair, listening faintly as kids outside the door laughed on their way to recess. His office felt heavier now. The report was not just a stack of papers. It was the quiet cry of a child who had yet to be heard. In that moment, he resolved to find out exactly what this little girl was carrying. The days of watching her slip through unnoticed were coming to an end. The next week began quietly, but pressure was already building behind the silence. The teacher waited until dismissal, when the room was empty except for the girl fussing with her backpack straps. She crouched down beside her, voice soft. "Sweetheart, I see how hard school feels right now. I need to know, do the words feel blurry? Or are you nervous about reading in front of everyone?" The girl froze, eyes locked on the backpack zipper. She said nothing. Her mouth tensed, as if words existed but refused to move from her throat. The teacher only sighed, smoothing the girl's shoulder before gently excusing her. Later that evening, the teacher made a call. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she explained to the mother what had been happening. She refuses each time. It's not only reading circle. It's spelling, math, even short answers. She shuts down completely. On the other end, the mother's tone carried confusion and worry. At home, she hides the papers. If I push too hard, she bursts into tears or runs to her room. I do not understand. She knows the alphabet. She writes neatly. But asking her to read, even a short line, it is like she disappears. Both paused, baffled. The teacher finally admitted, "I don't believe she is lazy. I think something else is keeping her locked up." The silence in that conversation carried weight. Neither adult had an answer yet. Back in class, comparison only made her burden heavier. During story hour, her friends leaned into books, stumbling over tricky words like mountain or photograph, then laughing at their own mistakes. For them, each error was temporary, quickly corrected. But for her, even holding a book produced a sharp ache in her chest. Every time her name approached in the circle, her shoulders locked. Her pulse raced. She imagined the eyes waiting, and her hands trembled before she passed the book away without opening her lips. Whispers trickled through the class. A boy in the back muttered, "She never reads." Another added, "She must not even know how." A girl turned one afternoon and whispered too loudly, "Why does she even come to school if she won't try?" Giggles followed. She kept her eyes down, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. But inside, those tiny barbs stuck like glass shards. The teacher tried to shield her by moving quickly or skipping her turn. But protection only went so far. Children noticed patterns. Teasing deepened, especially when sessions ended early with her empty page hidden under crossed arms. By the time the bell rang each day, she was exhausted, not from learning, but from holding everything in. At home, the battle carried on. Her mother sat across the kitchen table, pencil in hand, earnest. "We will go slowly." Just this one sentence, the cat ran fast. Instead of reading, the girl stared at the ceiling fan. Minutes stretched by. Then she mumbled, "I don't want to." Her mother tapped the pencil against the paper. "You can do it. I've heard you before. Don't pretend you cannot." Tears brimmed immediately. The girl pushed the worksheet away, scrambled from her chair, and dashed toward her bedroom. The mother sat still, guilt flooding in. She had raised her voice, when what she wanted only was to help. When she entered the bedroom later, the girl was already asleep, paper crumpled under her pillow, as though hiding evidence. Even simple outings drew reminders. At the grocery store, the mother asked her daughter to read the labels on canned soup. She glanced once, then stared hard at the floor tiles, refusing to answer. Other shoppers passed by, and her mother's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She whispered softly, "Why won't you just try?" but received no reply. Night by night, the mother's patience frayed at the edges. She spoke to her sister on the phone, whispering in the next room. Maybe she's pretending. Maybe she just doesn't want to work. But failing every test? She's 8. I don't know what else to do. Every frustration only deepened her guilt, too. When she peeked into her daughter's room before bed, the girl's small shape curled tightly beneath the covers. Stuffed animals gathered around like guards. She felt shame catch in her throat. Meanwhile, at school, decisions loomed. The teacher filled out another progress sheet, careful with her words, but honest. Consistently refuses to read. Daily assignments incomplete or hidden. Shows anxiety when called upon. At the bottom, she hesitated before writing the recommendation. Consider referral for principal's review. Signing her name, she pressed the paper flat. She wanted support, not punishment. But the weight of her input was undeniable. On Friday morning, the girl dropped her backpack by the cubby. Unbeknownst to her, that same piece of paper was sliding across the principal's desk down the hall. The principal read slowly, noting not just the low grades, but the repeated behavioral pattern. He tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. Teachers had spoken quietly of these troubles, but now the evidence was official. He imagined her, the small, silent figure in the classroom, eyes fixed on the floor while other children spoke. Failing marks on every subject sheet spread across his desk like unanswered questions. The conclusion was inescapable. If nothing changed, she risked repeating the year, and perhaps losing far more than grades. So he set the paper into a red folder and circled a date on his calendar. He would call her mother for a formal meeting. He needed to hear from both home and school together. In that decision lay a subtle shift. No longer was this just a teacher's challenge or a mother's frustration. It was becoming a school-wide urgency. The small signs could no longer stay hidden. While children outside his office laughed freely at recess, he marked the folder with her name. The laughter faded through the closed door. Inside, a plan began forming, though he did not yet know the depth of what waited to be uncovered. The red folder stayed on the principal's desk through the weekend. By Monday morning, his mind was still circling back to the same unanswered questions. He had seen children stumble before, but what troubled him here was the silence, the way she shut down completely, without even a whispered attempt. He began quietly gathering more details. During lunch duty, he asked the teacher, "When she refuses, does she look angry or frightened?" The teacher shook her head. "Neither. She looks blank, as if the words aren't even there to begin with." The principal nodded solemnly. That description told him plenty. He asked for more examples, and the teacher pointed out how her assignments were often wrinkled or hidden under her arms. She holds them so tightly, it looks like she's protecting something. Later that afternoon, he slipped into the back of the classroom without announcing himself. The children didn't notice at first. They were bent over their books. When the teacher asked for volunteers, voices rang out, but when the turn was about to reach her, the girl stiffened. The book sat unopened on her desk. Her head dipped forward until her hair created a curtain. He watched her knuckles turn white around her pencil. The other children filled the silence with laughter and extra words, but she never lifted her eyes. The quiet around her seemed to hum like a fragile wire, stretched to the point of snapping. By dismissal, he was resolved. He called her to his office under the pretense of helping carry papers. She followed, dragging her oversized backpack, steps hesitant. Inside the office, he tried to arrange the space so it didn't feel like an interrogation. He set the folder aside and pulled out a chair by the window. "I thought you might like to sit here. The light's good." His voice was careful, almost casual. She sat quietly, her legs swinging just above the floor. Her hands stayed locked in her lap. He leaned back, not towering over her, and spoke gently. "I hear reading in class has been difficult. Want to tell me what it feels like?" She opened her mouth, but then closed it. Her gaze drifted toward the window, avoiding his. Seconds ticked by in silence. Eventually, she shook her head once and pulled her backpack tight against her chest. He did not press her. "That's all right," he said softly. "Sometimes it takes a while before words feel safe." He offered her a pencil and small notepad. "You can draw if you'd rather." She traced a few faint lines, then stopped. When he looked closer, he noticed tiny smudges near the edges of her paper. They weren't pencil. They looked like tear stains, small circles where droplets had dried. That image lingered with him well after she left. Tear stains on homework pages. A child who would rather sit silent than risk a single word. The puzzle pieces were there, but some hidden piece still kept the full picture from view. The next day, he approached the school counselor. "I need your help," he admitted. "She's shutting down in every subject. Her teacher can't get through, and today she wouldn't even speak to me." The counselor listened with quiet attention. Children sometimes carry fears they cannot voice with adults in authority. We can try through play, through drawing, even through whisper games. That afternoon, the girl visited the counselor's room. It was a softer space, with cushions on the floor and bins of colorful markers. She sat stiffly at first, but when the counselor brought out a tray of small figurines, she began arranging them quietly. No words, just movement. In the following days, the counselor reported back to the principal. "She'll whisper single words to me sometimes. Names of animals, colors. She engages when the task is playful, but as soon as we open a book, she turns away." The principal rubbed his forehead. "So it's specific to reading." The counselor nodded. "That's my observation. She doesn't resist speaking completely. She resists reading aloud." The teacher confirmed the pattern. "Even in math, if the workbook has too many words, she shuts down. But if I read the instructions aloud and ask her to solve, sometimes she writes the answer." The principal leaned on his desk that evening, staring at her folder again. The problem wasn't laziness. It wasn't even complete muteness. Something triggered her silence each time letters met her eyes. But still, he sensed there was more underneath. Fear that ran deeper than academics. Determined, he scheduled another one-on-one. This time, he kept the office door open a crack, leaving sunlight to soften the edges of the room. He offered her water in a paper cup, then sat low in a chair beside her, not across a desk. "I noticed your drawings are very detailed," he began lightly. "You make the lines neat, and you don't give up halfway." Her eyes lifted, only for a second. It was the nearest thing to pride he had seen from her. "I wonder," he continued, "if reading feels harder because the letters don't stay where they should. Do they sometimes look like they're moving?" A flicker crossed her face, but she pressed her lips tight and shook her head, retreating again behind silence. He sighed quietly, choosing not to challenge her denial. Instead, he placed the notepad between them. "If you'd rather not talk today, that's okay. You can take this home for your drawings. Bring it back tomorrow if you want." She accepted it without a word. When she left, he sat back in his chair, heavy-hearted. His instincts told him there was something she feared exposing. Not just difficulty with letters, but shame anchored by unseen weight. The counselor entered moments later. "How did it go?" "Still nothing spoken," he replied. "But she reacted when I mentioned letters moving." The counselor nodded thoughtfully. "That small reaction may be a clue. It means she noticed that you noticed. Keep offering her safety. If she feels you won't punish or shame, she may finally let the truth slip out." The principal stared again at that red folder on his desk, the neat columns of failing marks. For him, it no longer represented poor performance. It represented a barrier, begging to be understood. He resolved he would not let her drown unnoticed. The counselor was right. Patience and steadiness had to be his tools. He prepared himself for another attempt, knowing the first real breakthrough had yet to arrive. The counselor's room stood out from the rest of the school. Bright cushions were stacked neatly in a corner, posters of animals and shapes lined the walls, and a low shelf was filled with markers and toys. When the girl entered, her shoulders were tense, her eyes darting nervously between the unfamiliar objects. The counselor didn't rush. She simply invited her to sit on the carpet where she had spread out a tray of small animal figures. At first, the girl only sat stiffly, her knees tucked up under her chin. But after several minutes, her hand reached out. She placed a tiny wooden horse next to a plastic rabbit, then slowly built a line of creatures, as if organizing them for a parade. The counselor spoke quietly while she worked. "That looks like a strong horse leading everyone safely." There was no answer, but the girl's slight pause showed she had heard. Gradually, the counselor experimented with simple questions. "What color is this one?" she asked, lifting a blue elephant. The girl whispered so faintly the counselor had to lean forward to hear. Blue. It was the smallest word, but it was something. Later, she whispered red when shown another figure. Each word was brief, swallowed quickly, as though she regretted letting it out. The next session, the counselor set a drawing pad in front of her. "Can you draw what you see outside your window at home?" After a moment of hesitation, the girl sketched a rough square with lines crossing through it. Window panes. Then she added tiny dots that might have been raindrops. She avoided eye contact, but she had understood the question. The counselor quietly praised her detail. The girl's lips twitched up at the corners, almost a smile, before she bent back to the page. These were fragile steps. The counselor reported to the principal afterward. She whispers single words now. She'll draw if I ask about her day. She doesn't resist me entirely, but whenever I pull out a book, her body closes off instantly. The principal listened, brow furrowing. So she'll speak in whispers when she feels safe, but books remain the wall she won't climb. Back in the classroom, the teacher noticed the same. During math activities, if she read aloud the word problem, 5 apples on a tree, the girl might write the number correctly. But when left to confront the words herself, she only sat with her pencil, motionless, above the paper. One afternoon, the counselor brought out a stack of picture books, nearly wordless stories told through illustrations. She handed one across the table. Can you tell me what's happening here? The girl examined a page showing a dog chasing a butterfly. After long hesitation, she uttered one word. Dog. Where's the dog running? The counselor asked. The girl tapped the page gently, but said nothing more. When asked to read even a single printed word in bold letters beneath, she immediately closed the book and pushed it back. Her face was pale, shoulders trembling. The counselor didn't insist, only comforted. That's fine. You don't have to read aloud today. At those words, the girl's breath settled a little. Relief was evident. She had braced herself for scolding, and it hadn't come. The principal observed one of these sessions, quietly from the doorway. He saw how the child leaned slightly forward when drawing, but shrank away as soon as letters were involved. After the girl left for recess, he stepped inside. She shows interest, but freezes when print is near, he murmured. Yes, the counselor agreed. It doesn't look like defiance. It looks like fear. Like opening a book feels dangerous to her. The principal rubbed his jaw slowly. Dangerous or impossible? They both fell into thoughtful silence. At home, small clues surfaced as well. Her mother one evening noticed pages from a reading assignment crumpled deep inside the trash bin. When asked, the girl denied ever receiving homework. But her handwriting was visible on the margin, faintly smudged where tears had fallen. This discovery left the mother unsettled. Her daughter wasn't careless. She was hiding. By the next week, the counselor tried another playful approach. She set a deck of flashcards with single letters on the table, brightly colored, like a game. At first, the girl traced the letters with her finger. When shown the card for A, she pressed her lips together. The counselor asked softly, "Do you know the sound for this one?" After a pause, a shaky came out instead. Wrong sound, but a sound nonetheless. Then silence returned. It was as though her fear scrambled what she already knew. The counselor wrote in her notes, "Child has some recognition but is terrified of performance. Needs reassurance of safety repeatedly." Later, during recess, the principal walked alongside her as she lingered by the swings. "I saw the drawings you made for our counselor. You're very good at showing stories without words," he said gently. She met his gaze for half a second and then looked away. But that flicker of connection was enough for him to continue. "Maybe there are other ways to tell your story. You don't have to use books until you're ready." She didn't answer, but when he left, she began to swing slowly. His words seemed to have given a sliver of permission. Back in his office, he spoke with the counselor again. "These are only small breakthroughs, but they matter. She isn't refusing out of challenge to authority. She is guarding herself. There is a larger fear in her silence." The counselor nodded. "I believe the next step is for you to meet with her again, one-on-one. She's starting to trust the adults who give her space. If she senses that you won't press too hard, she might let the truth slip." The principal leaned back in his chair, his expression solemn. He imagined the girl's whispered words. Blue, red, dog. Such small scraps, yet heavy with meaning. So I try again. And this time, I'll make sure she knows the office is the safest room in the building. The counselor smiled lightly. She's not defiant. She's frightened. Once she believes you are on her side, She'll show you what has been locked away. That evening, the principal stayed late, arranging his office. He moved the stiff chairs aside, setting a soft rug near the window. On the desk, he placed a pad of paper and colored pencils. He rehearsed what he might say when she arrived. Gentle phrases, nothing that would corner her. In his mind, he pictured the girl sitting quietly, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the floor. He knew the truth was tangled somewhere inside her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And though he could not see it yet, he was prepared to sit with the silence as long as it took. The following afternoon, the principal kept his promise. He asked the girl to stop by his office after the final bell, but framed it as helping him organize papers. She hesitated at the door, clutching the straps of her backpack as though preparing to flee. "Don't worry," he said softly. "No test today. Just you and me making this place a little tidier." She stepped inside carefully. The office felt different from a classroom. Sunlight pooled across the rug by the window where he had placed a box of colored pencils. On the desk lay a stack of papers, the top one filled with his clumsy handwriting. He pulled out a chair for her at the small round table, not behind the imposing desk. "You know," he began, "my handwriting is terrible. Look at these squiggly letters. Would you be the judge today? Grade me with smiley faces, or maybe frowns." The faintest shadow of a smile flickered across her face. She picked up a pencil slowly and drew a crooked smiley at the top of his page. He put on mock seriousness. That was too generous. "My E looks like a squashed bug." A soft sound escaped her, half a laugh. He took it as a rare, hopeful sign. They worked together a few minutes, her drawing tiny symbols while he pretended to take critique. The air felt lighter. No other children, no pressure to open a book. Finally, he slid one more page toward her. This one with simple shapes drawn beside words. "What do you think of this one?" "It's supposed to be a cat, but, well, my drawing skills aren't much better than my handwriting." She studied the page. Her lips moved slightly, as though forming a word, but fell silent again. Her shoulders tensed. He didn't push. Instead, he leaned back, tone gentle. "I'll tell you a secret. Sometimes words don't stay still for me either. When I was your age, my eyes saw double. The letters would slip. Still do if I'm tired." Her head snapped up for a second, eyes wide with surprise. Then she looked back down, sharply. He waited. Then came a whisper so faint he almost missed it. "Numbers and letters. They move." His chest tightened. "They move?" he repeated softly. She nodded once, curls of hair brushing her cheeks. Her fingers gripped the edge of the paper firmly, as if afraid it would fly away. "They dance. Won't stay still." The truth hung in the quiet room like fragile glass. He kept his voice level. "That sounds very hard. Do the letters move every time you open a book?" She swallowed, whispering again. "Yes. At home, too." She lowered her eyes, cheeks hot. "Don't tell." The urgency in her whisper pierced deeper than the words themselves. He recognized it. Fear woven with shame. "I hear you," he said carefully. "And I promise, I won't tell anyone unless it's to help you feel better. But I want you to know this. You are not broken. You're not bad at school. Your eyes, your brain, they just see differently." Tears brimmed in her eyes. She shook her head harder, clutching her backpack. "If anyone knows, they'll think I'm stupid." He said so. The principal froze. He had heard slips like this before, children revealing more than they meant. He asked gently, "Who said that?" She pressed her lips tight again, shaking her head. He did not push. The wound was not ready to be exposed yet. But the truth, even partially spoken, was enough. It explained the strange battles in class, the shut-down silence, the crumpled homework, the desperate hiding. Every letter on the page felt like a trick of the eye, and each failure echoed someone else's cruel judgment in her ears. He laid a tissue gently near her hand. "Sometimes, when people don't understand, they say things that aren't true. What you told me just now, that's important. Thank you for trusting me, even just a little." Her small hand reached for the tissue without words. She dabbed her cheeks, still not lifting her gaze. To relieve the weight, he returned to humor. Now, about that cat I drew. Is it an A+ cat or a D- dog? She gave a tiny shrug, then traced a star onto the corner of the page. It was her answer. He smiled warmly, but inside felt the thrum of urgency. This was bigger than simple reading reluctance. She was battling something hidden, likely dyslexia or a related difficulty, complicated by shame delivered from someone at home. When she finally rose to leave, he said gently, "You can come here anytime you need, even if you just want to draw. My office can be your quiet corner." She nodded faintly and slipped out, backpack still clutched tight. After she left, the principal sat alone, staring at the curved star she had drawn. He realized he had stepped closer to understanding, but another barrier remained. The shadow of the voice that had told her she was stupid. He whispered to himself, "There's more than letters," haunting her silence. That evening, he called the counselor. "Breakthrough," he explained quietly. She admitted the letters move. "But she begged me not to tell, afraid people think she's stupid. Someone has drilled that into her." The counselor sighed softly. "That kind of fear doesn't come from nowhere. It's more than a learning challenge. It's emotional harm layered on top. We must tread carefully." The principal rubbed his forehead. "Yes, one step at a time. But I'll keep making space for her until she trusts enough to say more." The counselor's voice carried reassurance. "You gave her a safe place. That's the first door opening. The rest will follow." In the still quiet of his office, the principal laid the student's folder back on the desk, not as a record of failures, but now as evidence of unseen battles. Each blank answer, each refusal, was no longer mystery, but the outline of a struggle waiting to be named. And somewhere inside that struggle, a deeper truth still waited for light. The following week, the principal invited her back into his office, this time at the end of the day, when the halls were quieter and free from the chatter of other children. She entered slowly, sliding through the doorway with her backpack clutched like armor. He greeted her with a warm nod and pointed to the markers and paper waiting near the small round table. "You can draw while I finish signing these forms," he said, making sure she felt no spotlight pressing on her. She sat, laid her backpack on the floor, and picked up a green marker hesitantly. The principal stayed at his desk for a while, but kept his eyes softened so she never felt under watch. Minutes ticked by in silence, except for the slow squeak of marker against paper. When he finally moved closer, he didn't ask a question. He only admired her sketch. "That's a strong tree. Look at those branches." Her lips trembled in the faint suggestion of a smile. He leaned back slightly. "You know, I always thought trees are like protectors. They stand guard, no matter the weather." Something in her shoulders eased. Then, as if a dam had cracked, she whispered, "I'm not good at reading." The statement was so faint, he almost wondered if he imagined it. He took a breath. "Thank you for telling me that." She kept her eyes fixed on the tree she had drawn, her voice a low rush. "Letters. They move around. They don't stay. I want to stop them, but I can't." He nodded, careful not to show shock. "Does that happen with numbers, too?" Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "Math is bad, too. They switch places. And when this happens, how do you feel?" he asked gently. Her hand tightened around the marker until the cap squeaked. Her lips pressed together, but then she breathed. "Scared. Because he says it means I'm stupid." The principal stilled, his chest heavy. "Who says that?" His voice remained soft, no sharper than the rustle of leaves. She shook her head, hair falling over her face. For a long moment, she seemed caught between revealing the truth and keeping it locked inside. At last, barely audible, she murmured, "My dad." The words broke something open. Tears spilled silently across her cheeks. She tried to wipe them quickly, embarrassed, but they kept coming. The principal passed her a tissue box. "Take your time. You are safe here." She hugged the tissue to her face, whispering in fragments. He says I'm lazy. He laughs when I read wrong. He tells my brother I'm dumb. So I just stopped." Each word was soaked in shame. It took everything in her to keep speaking. The principal remained still, letting the pauses carry. He knew silence could be as healing as words. After several moments, she added, "I hide the papers so Mom won't see. She already thinks I don't try. If she knows, she'll be sad." He leaned forward gently. "Sweetheart, what you're facing is not because you're lazy. It's not because you're stupid. Sometimes the brain reads letters in a different way. It's called dyslexia. It means reading is harder, but it does not mean you are less smart." She lifted her eyes cautiously. His steady expression held no trace of judgment. You don't think I'm dumb?" "Not at all," he said firmly. "I think you are brave for carrying this secret for so long. You did not stop learning. You just carried too heavy a weight." More tears spilled. This time, though, there was a release in them. "I thought if I stayed quiet, no one would know. I didn't want people to laugh like he does." The principal inhaled slowly, his voice solemn. "No one in this school will laugh. We want to help you. You don't have to hide anymore." She whispered, "But if Dad finds out, he'll be mad." He chose his words with care. "Right now, our focus is making sure you feel safe here. The adults at school will help you. And your mom? She loves you. She needs to know the truth so she can stand beside you." The girl hesitated, then shook her head hard. "No, she'll cry, and then he'll be angry at both of us." He placed a gentle hand on the table, not touching her, but steadying the space between them. "You spoke today because you trusted me. That tells me you already have courage. We'll move slowly. But you must know, what he said to you is not true. You are not stupid. You are worthy of kindness." Her lower lip quivered. She tugged the tissue into shreds with her fingers, her voice breaking. "I wanted to believe that. But every time the letters move, I hear him say it again." The weight of her confession echoed in the quiet room. The principal felt his heart ache, but he kept his voice calm, measuring each word. "Then we will replace his voice with other voices. The voice of your teacher, your counselor, myself. Voices that remind you of your strength." She sniffled, daring another glance at him. "Do you think I could learn? Like the others?" "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "It will take support. Different strategies, patient practice. But yes, you can learn. And one day, you will read out loud with confidence." For the first time, her tears gave way to a shaky, uncertain smile. It lasted only a moment, but it was there. He allowed the moment to close softly, not forcing more. "Would you like to draw another tree? Maybe one with even bigger branches. A tree that shows how strong you really are." She nodded faintly, picked up a blue marker, and bent toward the page. The sound of marker on paper filled the silence again, her shoulders just slightly looser now. When the bell for late dismissal echoed faintly in the hall, she rose slowly with her backpack. She avoided his eyes, but before leaving, she whispered, "Thank you." Those two words weighed more than all her silence before. When the door closed, the principal leaned back, his own chest tight. Finally, the hidden truth had begun to surface. Not only the letters moving, but the deeper wound of being mocked at home. Her silence was not laziness. It was defense, built from years of shame. He resolved that this confession would not be left unheard. The next step had to be building a circle of adults around her, teacher, counselor, and mother, so her fear no longer stood alone. The principal knew the weight of what had been shared in confidence. He couldn't let it remain in the four walls of his office. A circle of care had to be built, but carefully, without exposing her to more fear. That week, he called for a meeting after class, inviting the teacher, the counselor, and finally her mother. In the conference room, the mother sat nervously, twisting the strap of her purse. "Is she in trouble again?" she asked quickly, anxiety spilling from her voice. The teacher shook her head. "No, this is not about punishment. We want to talk about support." The principal leaned in, his tone steady. "Your daughter has been carrying a difficult secret. She believes she cannot read because she is lesser. She said someone close has convinced her of that. But in truth, what she's experiencing appears to be a learning difficulty, possibly dyslexia. The words and numbers move for her. That is why she hides her work. The mother's face paled. She never told me. I thought she was just stubborn when she refused. Tears welled up in her eyes. Memories rushed in. Nights at the kitchen table, her own voice snapping in frustration, and her daughter running from the room. Her chest tightened. I accused her of being lazy, she whispered. I made it worse. The teacher reached across the table gently. You were trying to help with what you understood. None of us realized at first. But now we know, and we can change. For a moment, the room carried only the weight of her mother's regret. Then the counselor spoke with calm certainty. There are ways to teach children who see letters differently. With tailored techniques, patient practice, and encouragement, she can learn, the principal nodded. The key is to remove the shame. Build a routine that lets her succeed in small steps. Let home and school echo the same message. You are capable. The mother dabbed at her eyes. She looked around the table. Each adult's face showed determination, not judgment. Slowly, she nodded. Tell me what to do. So the plan began. The teacher adjusted lessons, offering instructions aloud, allowing oral answers instead of written ones where possible. The counselor scheduled sessions twice a week focused on gentle reading games, using colored overlays and larger fonts to ease the strain. And the principal promised to check in personally, keeping his office open as her safe space. At home, her mother committed to a new rhythm. Instead of battles over worksheets, she would sit beside her daughter and read the first lines aloud, letting the girl echo only a word or two without pressure. She decided to celebrate even half a sentence spoken out loud, rather than demanding perfection. Meanwhile, the girl entered this new phase cautiously. The first tutoring session was quiet. The counselor spread a small book on the table, its sentences short. She asked, "Can you read the word sun for me?" The girl pressed her lips together, frozen. But when the counselor traced the letters with her finger and whispered, "S, s, s," the child repeated softly, "Sun." It was the first time she had allowed her voice to touch a printed word out loud. She flinched as though expecting scolding. None came. Instead, the counselor beamed. "Yes, that's it. You read it," her brow furrowed, disbelieving. "I did?" "You did," the counselor confirmed warmly. And that's the first step. News of this small victory trickled to the teacher and principal. They shared looks of relief. Every journey begins with a single word, and she had spoken hers. At home that evening, her mother tried again with a simple picture book. They sat together at the kitchen table. Her mother read aloud. The dog ran. Then she pointed at a single word. "Want to try this one?" The girl whispered, "Dog." Her mother smiled, voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart." That's right. Eyes widened as though she hadn't expected praise for such a tiny effort. Something uncoiled inside her chest. Over the coming weeks, progress crept slowly but surely. There were setbacks, days she clammed up, times letters slipped again. Yet the circle of adults remained gentle. Instead of sighs and reprimands, she met steady encouragement. The teacher began letting her read in private. Just one word to the teacher's ear. No classmates listening. Sometimes it was barely audible, but each whisper counted. The principal stopped her in the hall to ask if she had drawn any new trees recently, reminding her she had strength stretching in many directions. Her mother, too, changed in small daily gestures. When homework time came, she no longer tapped her pencil impatiently. She brewed hot tea, pulled up chairs side by side, and said, "We'll do it together." At night, instead of pressing her to read a page, she read aloud herself until her daughter fell asleep on the couch beside her, safe in the sound of words without fear. Then, one afternoon in tutoring, something shifted. The counselor placed a bright flashcard down. Cat. She whispered the first sound, but then paused. The child's lips moved, and this time, clearly enough to be heard, she read the entire word. Cat. The counselor's eyes shone. Yes, that's wonderful. For the first time, the child let herself smile. A genuine, complete smile that reached her eyes. Later that day, the principal heard about it. He leaned back in his chair, quietly moved. For weeks, she had been locked behind silence. Now, with support surrounding her, she had cracked the door open wider. As spring sunlight filtered through the windows, the groundwork was laid for a new chapter in her learning. Still tender, still slow, but no longer hidden in shame. The breakthrough came during a tutoring session the following week. She was asked if she wanted to try reading a short phrase. At first, she froze. But then, softly as the flutter of wings, she pieced together 2 words in a row. Big house. The room fell silent. The counselor's heart swelled. That was more than a sound. That was reading. In that moment, the girl realized something important. Her voice no longer completely failed her. She could speak the words. And instead of being mocked, she was met with smiles. It was just 2 words. Yet to her, and to the adults who had worked tirelessly, it was a triumph. The weeks of whispered words, cautious tutoring, and long pauses all led, unexpectedly, to a single morning in early spring. The classroom buzzed with excitement. The teacher had organized a small assembly-style gathering where several classes met together for a reading circle. Parents had been invited to sit in the back rows. The air carried that mix of nerves and pride children feel when regular lessons turn into something more public. Among the students sat the 8-year-old girl, hands folded tightly on her lap. Her skirt wrinkled beneath fists clenched so hard her knuckles gleamed pale. She stared at her shoes, hearing the voices of classmates ripple ahead in the reading order. One by one, each student took a turn with the small, brightly illustrated book, reading a paragraph aloud. The hum of whispered practice filled the benches as each child waited. At the back of the room stood her mother, twisting her scarf nervously. The principal leaned against the doorway, eyes following both mother and child with equal care. Weeks of preparation, tiny victories built in supportive corners, had carried them all here. Still, the moment to come was fraught with risk. The line of readers shortened. Her teacher, heart thumping, held out the book when at last it was her turn. The silence seemed to sweep across the room, gathering everyone's attention. The teacher crouched slightly, lowering her voice. Only if you'd like to. You don't have to. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly. Her throat tightened, haunted by the echo of old taunts. Yet behind those echoes were different voices now. The principal telling her she was brave, the counselor celebrating a single word, her mother holding her hand by lamplight and saying, "Yes, sweetheart. That's right." Her fingers brushed the page. The letters shivered. For an instant, she wanted to pass the book along, hide again behind silence. But then she recalled the tiny star she had once drawn for the principal, proof she could speak in her own language. The memory steadied her. She opened her lips. No sound at first. The students near her shuffled restlessly. Her heartbeat thundered against her ribs. Only 1 word, she thought. Just 1. "Sea cat," she whispered, so faint the teacher leaned in. But the next words followed, shaky. "Ran. Fast." 3 words. A small sentence. Her voice cracked on the last word, trembling like paper in the wind. But it was there. Audible. Real. The room fell absolutely silent. The teacher's eyes widened, filled with sudden tears. A few children blinked in surprise, but no giggles escaped this time. Perhaps they felt the gravity humming in the air. Then, softly at first, the teacher clapped her hands. A boy joined, then another. Gentle applause spread across the circle, not raucous, but steady and warm. The girl's eyes brimmed with tears, but they were not the old tears of fear. These were hot with release, with the realization that speaking the words did not bring laughter or scolding, only acceptance. Her mother, in the back, pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking as tears welled up. The principal observed her reaction, a quiet nod affirming that their efforts had held. For the mother, the guilt of harsh nights at the kitchen table was still heavy, but in that moment she saw her daughter's courage shine past it, giving both of them grace. The teacher leaned low and whispered, "Beautifully done. Thank you for sharing your voice." The girl handed back the book slowly. Relief surged through her body, so intense she almost trembled. Around her, classmates smiled in unguarded ways, some even offering little pats on the arm or nods of respect. For once, she wasn't the girl who never read. She was the girl who had spoken and been heard. The principal let his gaze sweep across the room. He saw the ripple of effect, how a single attempt reshaped perception. Children who once whispered cruelly now stared with quiet curiosity, maybe even admiration. He thought about fragile ornaments, how easily a child's spirit can be cracked by careless handling, but also how carefully it can be mended when surrounded by patient hands. When the applause quieted, the circle moved on. Other students picked up the thread of the story. The moment might have seemed small to anyone unfamiliar with her journey, but to those who knew, it was monumental. The crossing of a threshold from silence to sound. At the end of the assembly, parents filed out. The mother lingered in the back, wiping her eyes with the corner of her scarf. As she gathered herself, the principal approached. "She did it," he whispered softly. She nodded quickly, speech too tangled with emotion to form sentences. Still, her eyes glowed with pride and relief. From across the room, the girl peeked back toward them. For a brief second, her eyes met her mother's. A smile curled tentatively at the child's lips. Her mother returned it, tears glistening, then reached out her arms when the girl hurried to her side. The hug they shared was quiet but unshakable. The teacher came forward, voice trembling slightly. She wanted to stop at one word, but she gave us 3. That's her bravery. The principal placed a hand gently on the teacher's shoulder. And your patience made that bravery possible. Together they watched as the girl pulled from her backpack a small notepad, tapping it proudly. She had written a few words in shaky pencil the night before, proof she had intended, perhaps, to attempt speaking them today. Planning courage in advance. The adults exchanged knowing looks. This was no accident. This was a decision made by a child who had finally felt safe enough to risk shame, and found instead that shame dissolved in the warmth of acceptance. Her mother stroked her hair slowly, whispering, "No one will ever convince me again that you are less. You are more than enough." The girl pressed into the embrace, cheeks damp but spirits lighter than they had ever been in a classroom. For the principal, standing a few feet away, it was the confirmation of every late-night worry and every careful preparation. A child, once trapped in silence, had found her voice. Not perfectly, not loudly, but undeniably. The assembly ended with laughter and chatter, children spilling out to lunch, the ordinary bustle returning. Yet for this one child, ordinary would never mean quite the same. She had stepped onto the fragile stage of her peers and spoken, even if only 3 trembling words, and the world had shifted in response. This was her turning point, the crest where hidden fear transformed into visible courage. The silence that had once defined her was broken, not with fanfare, but with the steady heartbeat of acceptance echoing all around. By the time spring melted into early summer, steady progress had grown from those first trembling words. In the classroom, the atmosphere around her had changed. Where there once had been whispers of mockery, there were now quiet nods of encouragement. On days when she read even a single sentence aloud, a classmate nearby would whisper, "Good job," under their breath. Not with pity, but with the simple recognition that every effort mattered. Her teacher adjusted the rhythm of lessons. Small, laminated cards with larger print slipped discreetly into her desk. She didn't need to hold them up in front of others. They were tools just for her. Sometimes she whispered answers directly to the teacher during group activities, and that was accepted as valid participation. Each small adaptation carved away at the mountain of fear that once seemed immovable. Grades, once covered in red marks, began slowly climbing. First in math, where oral explanations were allowed. Then in spelling, where progress came through daily practice and supportive sessions rather than timed tests. The principal smiled when the new progress reports showed more check marks than crosses. He kept them not just as records, but as visible proof for her. Pages she could see filled with affirmations of growth. At home, evenings no longer resembled battlefields. Instead of fights across the kitchen table, books now lay open between mother and daughter, like bridges. When her mother stumbled over a difficult paragraph on purpose, letting her daughter correct just one word, laughter erupted where once there had been tears. It became their routine, trading words, making gentle mistakes, proving together that learning did not have to wound. Bedtime offered another scene of change. Curling under the blanket, The girl no longer begged to skip story time. She asked her mother to read, then tried soft echoes of a line or two herself. Some nights she faltered, but no reprimand came. Only a warm hand smoothing her hair and a reminder, you are learning. That's what matters. The counselor reported signs of newfound confidence, too. During play sessions, the girl chose figurines and gave them names aloud without whispering. Drawing time now came with spoken descriptions. It's raining, she would say, pointing to lines of blue marker on the page. These small declarations seemed ordinary, but compared to the heavy silence of months earlier, they were revolutionary. The principal noticed her standing a little taller during recess, not hiding in corners as she once did. Though still quiet, she joined jump rope games when invited, and even called out numbers of turns before skipping onto the pavement herself. Other children accepted her presence naturally again, the stigma of silence fading in the face of her emerging voice. One quiet morning, as he crossed the hallway, the principal noticed her lingering by a bulletin board. She studied the posted list of names for the upcoming parent night. Children would demonstrate what they had learned. He expected her to avoid attention, but when he approached, she whispered, "Could I read too?" He crouched beside her, astonished, eyes soft. "Are you sure you'd like to?" "Only if it feels safe." She nodded with shy determination. "I want Mom to hear." His heart swelled at her bravery. He agreed and made arrangements with her teacher to select a very short, simple piece, 5 sentences at most. For days beforehand, they practiced in the counselor's office, slowly, patiently, never more than a few lines at a time. She stumbled, corrected, and pressed on. By the 3rd day, she completed the passage without breaking down, her voice still shaky but steady enough to carry. Finally, the evening arrived. Parents filled the classroom, settling into chairs along the back wall. The atmosphere brimmed with pride and nerves. The mother sat front row, hands clasped tight in her lap. She had practiced with her daughter every night, but her chest still ached with worry. Would fear overwhelm her again? When it became her turn, the child walked slowly to the front, paper clutched in her hands. She glanced once at her mother. Tears shimmered immediately in her mother's eyes, but she nodded firmly, lips forming silent encouragement. "You can." The girl drew a breath. The first word trembled, threatened to fold, but then steadied. Line by line she read, stumbling on one word but recovering without stopping. By the final sentence, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was audible, persistent, and finished with clarity. For a beat, the room waited in silence, as if everyone collectively held breath. Then a ripple of applause broke through. Parents, classmates, even teachers, all clapping gently, not out of politeness, but genuine admiration. Her mother covered her mouth, tears spilling freely, but these were not tears of regret. They were tears of recognition. She had thought the day might never come. Yet here, before friends and parents, her daughter had claimed her place as a reader. The principal leaned against the doorframe, heart full. Months of effort, every meeting, every tear, every whispered confession had reached this moment. The girl, once buried in silence, was standing in front of everyone and proving that shame no longer defined her. After the event closed, as families filed out, the mother embraced her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. The girl clung fiercely, face against her mother's shoulder. "I did it," she murmured, half disbelief, half joy. "Yes," her mother said firmly, voice quivering. "You did. And you'll keep doing it." By the end of the school year, the shift was visible in the records. Her grades no longer carried threats of being held back. Progress reports noted improvement, steady effort, and newfound willingness to participate. The principal advocated to the school board for more early screening practices, ensuring other children wouldn't have to endure prolonged silence before being understood. For the girl herself, the renewal was simpler. She no longer dreaded stepping into the classroom each morning. Instead, she tucked books beside her desk, eager to see how many words she could recognize today. When mistakes came, she did not crumble. She waited for the gentle reminders, and then she tried again. One evening, near summer's end, as the sun slanted through the kitchen window, her mother read aloud on the couch. Without prompting, the girl leaned closer and pointed to a sentence. Slowly, carefully, she read it herself. Her mother squeezed her hand softly. No tears this time, just a wide, steady smile. The girl smiled back, both understanding that this had become their new normal, less about surviving the shame, more about sharing the joy. The resolution wasn't a single moment of triumph, but hundreds of small victories woven together into a new daily life. Her silence had once seemed like the whole story, but now her voice rose steadily, proving that hidden battles can be transformed when surrounded by patience, compassion, and love. By the closing weeks of the school year, the little girl's journey had carried her from silence to a steady, fragile voice, now shaping full sentences. The echoes of frustration and shame that once shadowed every classroom moment had been replaced with murmurs of encouragement, hands clapping softly when she read. Where once she shrank from the page, now she reached toward it, even if the path forward remained challenging. The final day arrived with a quiet kind of celebration. In her classroom, sunlight spilled through tall windows, glinting off clusters of handmade decorations. Children took turns sharing projects. When it was her turn, she stood with a picture book clutched in both hands. The teacher's nod gave permission. The class hushed as her voice, faint but true, threaded into the room. This time there was no tremble that stopped her. She read each line slowly, halting once on a tricky word, then correcting herself. By the end of the short passage, her classmates broke into warm applause. Their admiration wasn't forced, it was earned. Across the back row, her mother pressed a tissue to her eyes. The principal, standing near the door, allowed a smile to crease across his steady face. Both knew they were witnessing the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. When she sat down, her shoulders no longer looked tight with fear. Instead, they settled, gently, as though the heavy pack she'd carried for months had been eased. She whispered to the girl nearby, and a small giggle followed. These ordinary interactions, once impossible under the weight of shame, now flowed easily. That evening, at home, her mother poured tea at the table. Together, they read aloud from the same book, trading lines. Where before there had been battles and tears, now there were gentle corrections and laughter. In the quiet of their kitchen, the girl closed the book with a satisfied smile. The story of this child reminds us that silence is often a signal, not defiance. Behind every blank page or untaken turn may be a storm of fear waiting for safety to arrive. The steady voices of a teacher, a counselor, a principal, and a mother created that safety. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss the next. Children's hearts and voices are fragile, but when heard and held with patience, they can grow stronger than we imagine.